many of those who do not know me, उन्होंने बता दिया है, Dr. Sabah Hussain, and we'll talk about the pericardial effusion at this time. I have nothing to declare. We know already a lot about the pericardial effusion, and I want you to respond quickly so that we move quickly through the next slide and we can get the lunch as early as possible. So, no, it's not working this way, excuse me. It's not running. No, the back slide. Yes, can you run both of these? Okay, these are the few real life cases that I have seen after Dr. Tipu has told me about this conference. So we have seen these cases recently. So what do you think about the pericardial effusion size, and what do you think about the case at this time? Please, Dr. Hikmat. Okay, now this is a good pointer. Well, Dr. Hikmat, as we all can see, there is a mild pericardial effusion, is a very little space apparent both in systole as well as diastole, and it's also the same. This is an image of the same patient. There is a circumferential pericardial effusion surrounding the heart. So the point was not to look at the mild pericardial effusion. I don't know. I'm sure many of you must have noticed, but there is also a dissection flap here. So this was actually the case of aortic dissection that we have seen in an emergency, and the patient was urgently sent for the cardiac surgery. So it's not important only to look at the pericardial effusion. Once we have seen it, we have to also dig out the source of it, so to get into some conclusion. That's very important for the patients. इसको run कर देंगे, please. Okay, this is another case. Can anybody comment? Size of pericardial effusion? Dr. Hikmat, आपको ही लूंगी. Okay. Okay. What do you think about the size? What do you think about the etiology? Can you guess anything? Yes, very nice. There is not an echo-free space. It's rather an echo-lucent space of moderate size, especially at the posterior wall. And despite the fact there is no effusion anteriorly, but this little amount can also cause a tamponade in a post-cardiac patient. This was our post-AVR patient. We have seen it in our ICU, and the patient was again sent for the surgery. So this is a clear-cut case. Of course, this is a large circumferential pericardial effusion with swinging of heart. So what is pericardial effusion? We all do know it's actually the accumulation of fluid within the pericardium. Normally, there is about 15 to 50 ml of the fluid between visceral and parietal pericardium to avoid the friction. Otherwise, there will be a lot of friction between the pericardium. It can present from the asymptomatic to a very symptomatic, fatally symptomatic presentation can be there. It can be acute presentation, it can be chronic, it can be trivial, or it can be a very massive effusion. The important thing to remember is it's not the size of the effusion that counts. It's not only the size of effusion that counts. It depends upon how acutely it's accumulating. It also depends upon how pericardium is compliant. I'll show you with the picture in a few moments, inshallah. So this was a very important slide. When to say it's pericardial fluid, that's a normal physiological fluid, and when to comment it is effusion. Effusion is actually a pathological condition. So the important thing to remember, and I want this to be taken at home, and to be remembered when you're taking your dinner at home, inshallah. So the fluid, as I told you, under 50 ml, okay, it can be a fluid, but beyond this, it's effusion. It should ideally be appearing, if it is normal, only during systole. But when it's persistent during systole and diastole, it's actually the pathological effusion. The third important, usually the physiological effusion is less than 5 mm in size, while the pathological one is more than 5 millimeter in size. These are the more important points that should be remembered. When you are reporting a case of during echocardiogram, when to comment it as a pericardial fluid and when to comment it as a pericardial effusion. Usually because of dependency, the normal fluid appears posteriorly while the pericardial effusion presents in a variable way. This is a simple chart, we already must be knowing it. So on the basis of sizes, we divide pericardial effusion into 3 different categories mainly. If it is like less than 10 mm, we call it a mild. If it is beyond 20, we call it severe. Anything in between is considered to be the moderate pericardial effusion. There are few of them has classified it as very large pericardial effusion if it is more than 25 mm or if it is causing a swinging of heart. One more thing that I want you to remember, as we are here, because we know that echocardiography is the gold standard to diagnose pericardial effusion. It's very important. That's why we are all sitting here and discussing this thing at this time. And nowadays we are doing more and more cases of pericardiocentesis under the ultrasound guidance. So it's not only important for the diagnosis, but also for the looking into the etiology and for further managing the patient. So we are doing something important, really important. Can you run it, please? So what do you think about it? अब तो हमारे उस्ताद भी हम आवाज होके बोल सकते हैं that I love their calls. Okay. For the sake of time, I just wrap it up. This is a large pericardial effusion. We all can appreciate it. It's a circumferential. What do you think about the atrias? At this time, other than my teacher, I don't want you to call out. I'm very familiar with my junior, Dr. Hikmat. He was once my junior, so I will call him again for the sake of time. Dr. Hikmat, please. Okay, there's RA and LA collapse, and it is consistent with the pericardial tamponade. So we are moving to the next step of pericardial tamponade. We know that the pericardial tamponade is a life-threatening condition because in this condition, the pericardial fluid has accumulated to a level causing a very high intrapericardial pressure, enough to impair the cardiac filling as well as output. So it's really life-threatening. One more thing that I have mentioned in the different color, just to take again to your home, is pericardial tamponade is a clinical diagnosis. It's not an echo diagnosis, it's a clinical diagnosis. Echo is only helping out in confirming it, to determine, again, its etiology, to determine its severity, but it's not an echo diagnosis. We just reported in our echo that we find an echo signs of tamponade. We are not saying the patient is in tamponade or not. So it's a clinical diagnosis. I told you a moment back that it is not the fluid, it's at the time which causes the symptom in a patient. So a small amount of fluid is accumulating very rapidly. Yes, it will increase the pressure earlier, and will cause a tamponade very earlier with the even little amount of fluid. But a large fluid can be accumulated in the pericardium without causing tamponade if it's a gradual onset of accumulation. So again, there are different factors determining the symptoms in a patient. Okay, we all are familiar with different signs or echocardiographic signs of tamponade in a patient. This is a very nice chart, so I pasted it over here, showing the different sensitivity and specificity, and it should be kept in mind when you're reporting a patient of tamponade. So you know which thing should come first and how much sensitive or specific it is to be confirming the diagnosis. So just to summarize it, the RA collapse is the most sensitive sign. Why? Because RA is very thin-walled. It's very thin-walled. It's a very low pressure area. And because of its low pressure, it can collapse easily with even a little effusion. So you will find it very early in the presentation. So atria collapse earlier because of low pressure, because of thin wall, while the ventricle collapse late. And if you got a ventricular collapse, think about a more specific sign. So most specific sign is RV collapse, and more sensitive sign is RA collapse. Rest of the findings are usually moderate. If, let's say, RA is collapsing for more than 30% of the cardiac cycle, it's considered to be very, very sensitive as well as specific. So also the time that counts in this vector. The same slide run kar denge, please. This same slide here, we have seen it a moment back. So we have already talked about that RA collapse earliest in the presentation, even before the clinical sign present. And the collapse actually depends upon the least pressure time. So during the cardiac cycle, the late diastole is the least pressure time for atrias. So RA collapse during the late diastole. The opposite happened with the ventricle. The least pressure time for the right ventricle is actually early diastole. So you will find the RV collapse in the early diastole. So two things to keep in mind to get the actually pathophysiology of it is least pressure time, least pressure area. That will determine when they will collapse in the cardiac cycle. Run kar denge, please. Okay, this was a very, very nice example of RV collapse that we have seen during the early diastole. It can ideally be seen in a parasternal long axis view, but there are two more views available that on which we can determine RV collapse. Okay, this was a very nice diagram. Sorry, somebody changed it? You changed it? Okay. In the parasternal long axis view, by applying the M mode, you can easily determine that there is a RV dip during the early opening of the mitral valve. Similarly, in the parasternal short axis view, you can also find this RV dip during pulmonary valve closure time. So try to do it in your routine practice and you will love to see it again and again in your practices. Okay, one more thing that is very specific about cardiac tamponade. Usually what happens, there is a difference between inspiratory and expiratory flow between the two ventricles. That is accommodated by not only changing the flow through the atrioventricular valve, but also by expanding outside. So normally during inspiration, there is, because of higher negative intrathoracic pressure, there is higher tricuspid inflow. And opposite happened to the left ventricle, opposite happened during the expiration. So during inspiration, higher inspiratory flow through the tricuspid valve. During expiration, higher flow through the mitral valve. So normally, however, as they accommodated by not increasing the flow through the AV valve, but also expanding outside, usually the variation is very less. Usually the respiratory variation is less than 10% at mitral and less than 15% at tricuspid inflow. So you can find these changes even in the normal patient, but they are not very marked. But what happened during the tamponade? These changes are more marked because now their ventricles are not expanding outside, pericardial fluid is not allowing it. So whatever has to accommodate, it should be within the ventricle. So the ventricular interdependency is marked, and that causes a marked respiratory variation. They have to increase the tricuspid inflow velocities. They have to increase the mitral inflow velocities with the respiratory phase. So for the diagnosis of tamponade, it should be more than 25%. It should be more than 25% in mitral inflow, and it should be more than 40% at tricuspid inflow to call it as a tamponade. This is how it looked like during inspiration and expiration. We must be knowing it. And this is my last slide. This should be taken again at home. You might find respiratory variation without tamponade in few patients, like if the patient is severely dyspneic or having COPD or the patient with a pulmonary embolism. So it should be ruled out when you're reporting for the tamponade. You might not find this respiratory variation. You might not find the variation even if there is a tamponade, like if the patient with a severe AR or ASD, or if the patient is on positive pressure ventilation. If you find, the last thing, if you find a patient in which there is echo signs of tamponade without IVC plethora, think about a loculated effusion, maybe because of post-trauma or maybe because of surgery, or think about the patient is hypovolemic, because IVC plethora is a very sensitive sign for large pericardial effusion or tamponade. Thank you.